I often, when I teach my students, talk about the concept of election, and some people think that's something about which Jewish people are to become snobs, elected. But I often remind them that this is not about being privileged in the sense of having material rewards. It's about the kind of shock that makes the story of Jonah and the fisher's whale say, oh no! Because you see, that kind of election is what it is to bear the weight, the profound weight of what it is to be responsible for the word of God, or put in another language, the very ethical obligation of humankind to each other. It's what it is to face it in the very meaning of justice, not simply as an abstract idea, but the struggle to make it a living reality. We've asked to have our keynote speaker today because he exemplifies that ideal. I know that if I were to have met Gary Tobin and talked in detail about putting this meeting together, the person he would most say he would like to have come and speak would undoubtedly be Rabbi Capers Funnye. When I think of Rabbi Capers Funnye, I think about him in a way that has a multitude of people reach out and use the words, my rabbi. You know what I mean? My son, Elijah, say if we say every time we're in Chicago, we're going to go to Capers Shul, he's ready. And it's a kid who is not too crazy about religion. Sula, our daughter, same thing, all of us. And why this is so is when you go to his shul, you see immediately that there's a community of people who meet in a way that reflects what we see in this room. And when I say meet, I don't mean diversity simply in the sense of racial diversity or ethnic diversity. Because he's in the south side of Chicago, where you see, for instance, recent Latin American immigrants right in there, ready to go. You see Russian immigrants who come in there, ready to go. This synagogue also has a dialogue going with poor Palestinians in the community. They meet because at the heart of what they do, they understand that we are responsible for each other. In terms of his credentials, there are many. Rabbi Capers Funnye, if you'd like to know in terms of the exact name of the synagogue, he's the leader of the Beth Shalom Benai Zakin Ethiopian Hebrew congregation in Chicago, which, by the way, was founded by an East Indian rabbi. All right? Let's add that note there. And then in addition to being a senior researcher for the Institute for Jewish Research and Community, he's also on the board of rabbis in Chicago, the vice president of the board of rabbis. But outside of that, there's the other work that he does, not only in terms of Jewish day schools, but also the work he does, I would argue. Now, I know a thing or two about this. I consider him a scholar. And what I mean by that is that with great humility, he studies not only Torah, but he studies also the very question of the understanding of what it is for human communities to work together to build a better world. He has a degree in human resources administration, and for many people that's simply certification. But it's clear that for Rabbi Capers Funnye, the very question of a human resource is a question of talking about what is most vital for all of us, that we are each other's fundamental lifeline in this world. So I've asked him to come to speak out of great admiration, great respect, and I would like you all to join me right now in welcoming this wonderful human being, our Rabbi Capers Funnye.
Good afternoon. I tell you, wow, with that, you get bars set so you want to be able to live up to those bars. It's fantastic, it's wonderful to be here in the city of brotherly love, in the city of Philadelphia again, to be with so many friends in the presence of Dr. Lewis Gordon, Jane Gordon, to see so many folks that I have worked with in the city of Philadelphia for a very long time. And to be here to have an opportunity to share in this memory of my friend. And as a person of African descent, I can tell you that I don't have many friends that don't look like me. Gary Tobin was my friend. My God, Mike, was that you? Classmate from Spurgeon. Not many people seek you out and say, I want you to come to my home to break bread with me. Not many people seek you out, come to your home, knock on your door, and say, I want to get to know you because I can learn from you and we can share together. This was Gary Tobin. Brutally honest. And that honesty was so immeasurably helpful. And then I had to step back and ask myself, I'm actually friends with a Republican. Besides Earl and Deborah Bowen, they're Republicans too, and Andre. And I had to really think about that. How could I be friends with this staunch Republican who was such a nice guy? So that taught me that you just cannot judge people by their political labels, because it really doesn't tell us where they are politically, may not be where they are in social context and in social thinking. And so he said, we need to be working together. And I asked the question, why? Why did you come to me? He said, because I think that you're going to have a voice in the years to come. Little did I know, for a guy who didn't do much in religious school, that he was also prophetic. Didn't go to synagogue that often, but who was able to see, and to see with a different eye than the ordinary eye is. This was Gary Tobin. And so I'm here today and could be no other place. And Lewis, I thank you for the invitation, because he was my friend. And it was so fitting that last week I was at the first religious synagogue that I taught at many years ago. And I was speaking, and I told the rabbi who's retired there now, I said, you know, you were the first rabbi to invite me to speak in your bima about 22, 23 years ago. I said, and your synagogue was the first synagogue to reach out to me and asked me to teach in the religious school. And I really enjoyed 6th grade much more than 8th grade. There's something that happens to children between 6th grade, Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, you can control. 8th graders, they control you. And what made it even more interesting is I had some kids in 6th grade who had totally morphed by the time that they got to 8th grade into something very different. But one thing I can say about those kids that I taught over the 7 years that I worked in religious school on Sunday morning, being a place for kids where children did not want to be, is every Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or holiday, a group of my kids who I taught 20-some years ago will get together and come and visit their rabbi and daven with me for services. And that warms my heart more than anything else. Because after chasing those kids around, grabbing them, putting them down in the chair, laying the Bible before them, and the kid jumps up again and shoots out. So if you ever went to Jewish Sunday school on Sunday morning, you know what I'm talking about. And when you did not want to be at that place. And I won't ask you to identify yourselves. Rabbi Caldwell spoke about 50 years later, after things had been signed. President Johnson signed an act that said certain things were outlawed. And indeed, on a federal level, they were outlawed. But in 1966, the end of 66, the beginning of 1967, I traveled to South Carolina to attend high school, to finish my high school education. And getting there, I had to go to the doctor, so my aunt was taking me to the doctor's office, and as we made our way to the doctor's office, I just was going in the door, and my aunt said, "Stop." 1967, Georgetown, South Carolina. That door said, "Whites only." After President Johnson had signed this noble act, and the other door said, "Colored." In 1967, I was on my way to the movie theater, and coming from Chicago, I wanted to see the show. So I went in and I gave my $1.75 and headed in the door, and the woman said, "Stop. Negroes do not sit on the main floor here. You have to sit in the balcony." This was 1967. I relate that to you because I was in Boston a few weeks ago addressing the Massachusetts Board of Rabbis. And then I went to Ghan Academy, a very large Jewish high school. And this young student in the 11th grade stood up. He says, "Rabbi, are you an African-American Jew? Or are you a Jew that's an African-American?" I said, "That's a relative question." And I gave him those two stories. And then I gave him this last story. I said, "Have you ever had this happen where you had to go into the doctor's office? Have you ever had this all happen where you had to go to the balcony and could not go on the main floor? And if you did, you would have the police called on you. Or have you ever been stopped by the police for a busted taillight and 4 police cars come in on you from north, south, east, and west, and all of them have shotguns because you have a busted taillight?" So I asked the young man, it's a relative point. I am an African American, I am a Jew. And within the context of my being, they merge together. But let me ask you, as a young Jewish boy, what experience have you gone through that makes you who you are? And exactly, who are you? He said, "Gee, I don't know right now." So he's still thinking. But I'm here, and I want to share because everything that I've heard has been so wonderful, so fantastic about Heschel. I have a lecture that I do on Heschel and King and their relationship and how Rabbi Heschel sought to work with Dr. King. But there's one thing that I want to kind of start this out with that I think Heschel and King would have both agreed to. As a matter of fact, Dr. King stated this, and he got it from a young man who was the son of Mahatma Gandhi. And he traveled around with this saying from his father. Gandhi stated that modern man has 7 sins. Modern man wants wealth without work. Modern man wants pleasure without conscience. Knowledge without character. Knowledge without character. Science without humanity. worship without sacrifice, and politics without principle. As I read that, I said, boy, Gandhi kind of sounds Jewish to me. And some of his thinking and how he thinks about these things. Today I'm here with many of you, co-religionists and colleagues, to talk about my spiritual journey, because we've heard the journeys from a broader context, but I want to talk to you about my spiritual journey, and the spiritual journey for many Jews that look like me. Unlike many converts to Judaism who became a part of the Jewish faith because of adoption, because of marriage, or because of being a biracial child, my journey and the journey of many other African Americans to Judaism is one as seeing ourselves as being Baal Teshuvah, returners to that which we were. And I have a presentation that I normally do, and I gave this presentation in San Francisco 12 years ago, and Gary got it, and he understood it. And in understanding it, he didn't fear it, nor did he fear what we had to say. So if you would please, I would like to take you with me on a very short trip. This trip was not planned by you, but the passage was free. The accommodations were not that great. You had to share your room with a massive crowd, many of whom you had never laid eyes on before in your life. You were on the ship. You were a little crowded, although the space was large. It's just that so many passengers were packed into this small space that it made the travel a little uncomfortable. You did get to stand on deck to take in a little sun every 2 weeks on this trip, a trip that could take you 4 to 6 weeks. Meals that you ate were not fit for human consumption, but you ate to survive. However, some of the passengers did not want the food or the conditions that the travel agent had arranged. So they left the trip by jumping overboard to their deaths. You didn't jump. You prayed. You wandered. Where were you going? And how you might get home again. Finally, you arrive at your destination, and your accommodations are really no better than the accommodations provided to you aboard the cruise ship. Your name is Ochiliwe Yifune. Ochiliwe in the Igbo tongue, leader of a multitude. Yifune means for whom a way is prepared. But someone tells you that your name is now Toby, James, John, or Charles. Every vestige of your self-identity is stripped away from you. Your language, your culture, your traditions, and your family are all gone. You were given a new God to worship. And it's funny that the picture of this God that they have given you, that represents this God, happens to look like the men that extended to you that very gracious treatment on your cruise to this new land. In the back of your mind and in the recesses of your soul, you yearn for home. You yearn to understand this new condition that you find yourself in. Your soul cries out to return, to know who you are, where you are, and to know what your inheritance is. You open your eyes and you realize that it is really not a dream, but it is indeed your new reality. You are called slave, chattel, sold to the highest bidder. You are called boy, colored, uncle, Negro, and yes, the N-word. Yet through all the years of slavery, the Ku Klux Klan, Jim Crow, the John Birch Society, the White Citizens Council, segregated housing, segregated schools, segregated public accommodations, and a lack of equal opportunity for employment, you still want to push forward. You are that strange fruit that Billie Holiday sang about, hanging from the trees in Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and the list goes on. The strange fruit are the black men that had been lynched for not getting off the sidewalk as white folk went by. Maybe you dared to speak up about the conditions that your family had to live in, that black folks were stuck in America itself. But perhaps you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you were lynched. Through all of this, there's a small, still voice that cries from the essence of your being that the late chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Kook, called the yesh. The yesh is the substance of your being. It means in Hebrew, there is. It is your humanity. Therefore, you begin to search and you begin to seek. You begin to ask questions and you begin to pray. Finally, the Eternal sends a person to guide you into the recesses of your past. And as we used to say, this person played sleep, as the old expression goes, acting as if he too had forgotten his roots and his history. This person remembers a few words for God in the tongue of your ancestors. Words like Adonai, El, Elohim, Ochukwu, and the Eternal One. Then a new faith begins to grow inside of you, and you yearn to learn. You want to learn who your ancestors were. How did they pray? What songs did they sing? Now you're a product of the 1960s in America. You're a product of a time when the civil rights marches on Washington, D.C., led by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1963. Yet even after singing and the signing of the Civil Rights Act by President Johnson, as I said earlier, your condition and the condition of a lot of people is not changed by the signing of legislation in Washington, because it doesn't change the hearts and the minds of the people that were running the states that were indeed a part of the United States. So even after the signing of that legislation, you are still a second-class citizen. But as you continue to grow, then something begins happening, and we mentioned 1969 a little earlier. It happens to be the year that James Brown also said, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." So you start reading. You want to read Malcolm X of the Nation of Islam. You want to read Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's writings, and you thirst for more. You want to read Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's writings, and you thirst for more. So you examine the writings of Marcus Messiah Garvey. You examine the writings of Sheikh Anta Diop. You examine the writings of Blyden and John Johnson and Carter G. Woodson, specifically the miseducation of the Negro. John Henry Clark and Leo Hansberry and J.A. Rogers. You begin examining from Superman to Man and the true meaning of what Rogers meant when he wrote Sex and Race. Then in 1971, your life takes a dramatic turn because someone introduces you to a book by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Joseph Williams of Boston College. The book is titled Hebrewisms of West Africa, From the Nile to the Niger with the Jews. This book was published in 1930 by Boston College Press, and it has been reprinted several times over the years since then. This was my first introduction to Judaism through the lens of Africans. In 1979, I met my teacher, my mentor, and rabbi in the presence of Chief Rabbi Levi Ben Levi of Beth Shalom Ethiopian Hebrew Congregation in Brooklyn, New York. Rabbi Levi opened my mind and my heart to the true essence of Judaism. And as I studied with Rabbi Levi, he encouraged me to study Judaism at Spertus College of Judaica in Chicago, while also studying with him. Through Rabbi Levi and my many teachers and mentors at Spertus College, I fell in love with what today is termed Rabbinic Judaism. I felt a special relationship with several teachers, several instructors at Spertus College, like Rabbi Byron Sherwin, a protege of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Rabbi Sherwin introduced me to the writings of Dr. Louis Jacobs, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Martin Buber, Spinoza, Louis Finkelstein, Jerzy Kaczynski, and numerous other Jewish writers and scholars and thinkers. So you become a part of a people, a part of a movement. You dedicate yourself to Torah. However, you are always questioned about being Jewish. How is it that you're Jewish? Was your mother Jewish? Did you convert to Judaism? If you converted, when did you do it? And even more so, why did you convert? Weren't you happy being in your former faith? I never thought that I would meet a black Jew. And all of these questions might seem okay to the person that is asking them. However, to an African-American Jew, to a Jew from Africa, to a Jew from South America, to a Jew that don't look like you, this question is extremely insulting. And you say, why? Why would it be insulting? Because the Talmud tells us that you don't ask that question. But I've learned that people only apply the parts of the Talmud that they want to apply when they want to apply them. Because we read in the Talmud, and I love to give this, this example, where it talks about blemishes and rashes. The Talmud says that the Jew is not Ashkenazi, nor is the Jew Kushi, but that the Jew is somewhere in between, of an intermediate shade. That's what the Talmud says. Then the Talmud goes on to say that an extremely dark person
should not marry someone as dark as they are. At least their children be pitch black. And you can't see them at night. And that an extremely white person should not marry someone just as white as them. At least you won't be able to find your kids in the day. Then the Talmud says that a very red person should not marry a person just as red, lest their children be beet red. A very short person should not marry a person just as short, lest their children be midgets. And a very tall person should not marry someone just as tall, lest their children be overgrown and tall. As I studied that some years ago and reflected on it, it seems that the rabbis understood that Jews were never a race. And this was talking about leprosy and how you determine leprosy within an individual. So if Jews were all of one hue, why this great debate in the Gemara? Why this discussion? This tells us instantly that we know that Jews were of all hues, and that no one hue of Jewish being was more relevant or more important than anyone else. So working with B'Kol Lashon, in every tongue, where we are seeking to open the gates. So I'm working for the day that when I go to a synagogue and I have my kippah, I have my tefillin, I have my siddur, I have my talit, I'm laning the prayers, I can lane the Sefer Torah, and ultimately someone will come up to me and say, "Are you Jewish?" I used to, I stopped. I said, "No, I found this stuff outside. I just wanted to come in and see how it works." "Oh, stop kidding, you're Jewish." Of course I'm Jewish. It's 85 degrees. It's sunny. It's Saturday morning, and I'm in here with you. You were an advertiser. How did I get here? The gates of our synagogues, the gates of our institutions. We must recognize that the Jewish people look like the people in all of the world in which they are found. And therefore, in Kaifeng, China, the Jews look like other Chinese people. Therefore, in Bombay, India, the Jews of Bombay look like other people from that region of the world. And the Jews from Western Europe or Eastern Europe look like the other peoples of that land. And Jews from the Caribbean and South America and Africa look like the people in those lands in which they are found. So we are connected by our experience at Sinai. But for too long, Jews of color have been like Jerzy Kosinski's painted bird. The painted bird Jerzy Kosinski wrote as he re-examined his experience of hiding from the Nazis in the forest of Poland. He came across this guy, I think his name was Rabbi, who had a habit of setting traps and catching birds. And as Rabbi would, And as Lubna would catch the bird, he would get the bird and paint the bird all kind of different colors. He didn't want to eat. He would then just let the bird go. And the bird would try to reintegrate itself into its flock. And although that bird could fly all of the intricate patterns, and although that bird knew all of the chirps that all of the birds in that flock knew, it looked so different, it looked so strange that they would turn on that bird and peck it. But the flock was all that the painted bird knew. And the painted bird would continuously try to be reintegrated into the flock. And the other birds sometimes would turn, pecking on the painted bird, until the painted bird oftentimes would fall to the ground dead. For too long, Latino Jews, Asian Jews, African Jews, African American Jews, Jews in the gay, lesbian, and transgender community, all of these Jews have been like that painted bird. And even though we sing the same Shema, we daven the same Amidah, we read the same Parsha each and every Shabbat, we're painted birds. So it is my hope, as it was Gary Tobin's hope and dream, that we would all realize what the prophets say, and that is that Israel is a speckled bird, meaning that she looks like a lot of different ways, like this room looks. And that Judaism is that thing that draws us together. So I work to continue to work for the type of world where we see ourselves not as painted birds, nor look to question the other that comes into our midst. If they know how to hold the Siddur, if in fact they have their own talus, if they know how to put on tefillin, and they come to your house of worship, err on the side of thinking that they're Jewish, as opposed to going and asking, are they Jewish? Because we are Bekol Lashon, in every tongue, in every color, in every ethnicity, with every understanding. And it should be Kol Yisrael, Haredi, Ze Banze. All Israel is responsible. So in the memory of my friend, I thank you for this day, for this effort, and I pray that your works will continue until we have the doors of Jewish houses of worship opened and welcoming of the searcher and the seeker from whatever walk of life they come. Thank you very, very much.
Rabbi Funnye would like to entertain a few questions, but we do have time.
I have a historical question for you. I know you've done some work amongst the Igbo.
Yes.
Usually when we think about the expulsion of Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, what's not included in most of the scholarly literature is that within one generation, there was the expulsion of the Jews from Songhai.
Right.
I know you've done some work with the Igbo. Have you heard of any traditions that when Askia Muhammad expelled the Jews from the Empire of Songhai, that some of them may have fled south to form ancestors to the communities that you're working with? Because usually when that literature includes the expulsion of the Jews from Songhai, it stops. There's no...
It doesn't really follow up the expulsion. Well, actually, it traces back before that in Joseph Williams' work, Hebrewisms of West Africa, from the Nile to the Niger with the Jews. He traces the movements of the Limba people from Yemen, and then going from Yemen, traveling down the coast of East Africa, establishing Great Zimbabwe, and then eventually moving into the area that we call South Africa today. Amongst the Igbo and the Yoruba people, of whom I work with in Cameroon, Nigeria, and Ghana, their traditions go back. My wife and I, in 2001, we made our first trip to Africa. The Obi, who's a local king, which is a Hebrew word, which means seer, one who can see and foretell the future. It's interesting because the Obi puts this chalk around his eyes to help him see, and he's the king priest in the Igbo people. The Obi pulled out this instrument, and it was a shofar, and then the Obi blew tekiah, and my wife looked at me, and I looked at my wife. Then the Obi blew shivareen. I fell out laughing. And so all of the elders said, like, you know, what's this dude laughing about? We're serious. And I said, that's a shofar. Jews around the world blow it at Rosh Hashanah to end Yom HaKippurim. And some communities it's blown to bring in the Shabbat. And some communities it's blown at Rosh Chodesh. And the notes that you blew are the ones that interest me, because those are the notes that we blow in the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah. Where did you get those notes? He said, they were handed down to us. So we can determine how old those notes are, how far back, and maybe this is where some of your scholarship can come in. In certain Igbo communities, the Molim are women and not men. And I found that very interesting because in most African cultures and society, you know, men are up here and women are more suppressed. So when I saw this woman serving as a Moel, I said, what's up? And he said, Rabbi, it's the Bible. It's the Bible? It's the Bible. So that community took the Bible so literally. In the early part of Exodus, when Moses is going to return to Egypt to do the work that Hashem gives him, Zipporah has to circumcise their youngest son. And so in certain communities, on the 8th day, boys are circumcised among the Igbo and the Igbo. They don't eat pork, they don't eat shellfish. It's interesting. So they don't know what Glock kosher is, but they know what biblical kosher is. So as we begin the process of examining how these groups got there, I think with there being so little, no tradition of the Babylonian Talmud or the Yerushalayim Talmud, none of those things are there. It's pure, straight, unadulterated, almost like the Beit Yisrael of Ethiopia. They had their own traditions that had essentially evolved, and being in that closer proximity to the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael, their Sefer Torah was still in Ge'ez. It wasn't in Hebrew. So it was still a Semitic language, but it wasn't the Hebrew language. And look at that close proximity. So now measure that out by 6,000 miles this way and 9,000 miles going in this direction, and how language becomes lost. And you know, what I found interesting is when the scientists, the guy did the thing on the limba, and he did the swab and said that the Buba clan had a, you know, connected to the Kohanim. I just found it interesting when the Rabbi said, "Oh, we don't deal with science. We deal, you know, that's just science. We don't believe science. We have to believe something else." Okay, fine. But I got to tell you, my best experience was I made my first trip to Israel 2 weeks ago, and it was a fantastic trip. And somebody else said it. Israel needs to do a better job of putting forth the true level of the diversity of its people. They're not doing a good job. And so someone spoke about anti-Semitism, anti-Israelism, anti-Jewishness in the African-American community, oftentimes than not. From that 15-second glimpse that you get on the news about what's going on in the Middle East, you see a tank. You see some kids with some bottles or some rocks. And so I said to the ambassador to the United States from the state of Israel, Michael Oren, I said, you guys have to do a much better job. Because right now, you see in the black community, folks not saying anything because as soon as they do, they're anti-Semitic, they're anti-Jewish, oh, they hate Jews, oh, no. What they see is Goliath and David. But they see the Palestinians as David. And they see the Israelis as Goliath. That formula has to be changed. It must be changed. Israel must do a better job of truly promoting and saying who she is as a culture and a society. Where when you really look at them, you see some Jews darker than me in Israel. And then you see some that look Arab looking. They're from every part of the world. And truly, it's a much better reflection of what Jews and Judaism are than we have and what we understand here in the United States. But that's not reflected. It is not reflected, their numbers, 5.5 million, to the numbers of nations that surround them that want her absolutely and utterly annihilated. That message is not out there. So part of my job is helping to get that message out in the African American community, in other communities that, you know, where people let me come in and talk about this thing. So, yes, sir.
How were you received when you met with President Netanyahu?
Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Yes.
Well, I had met Prime Minister Netanyahu with his first election in the 96-97 in Chicago, and he was kind of stoic and standoffish. He was so.
How were you received when you met with President Netanyahu?
Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Yes.
Well, I had met Prime Minister Netanyahu with his first election in the 96-97 in Chicago, and he was kind of stoic and standoffish. He was so effusive and warm when we met with him. This time I actually had to look it back and make sure it's the same guy. Because he really transformed. He's very warm, very effusive. Spent a great deal of time with our delegation, which were primarily African-American politicians from the Midwest. And so it was interesting. It was very interesting that how intent he was on listening and hearing our reflections on the state of Israel, and really sharing with us his vision as Prime Minister for the state of Israel. Yes.
But my question is, I know that there are so many amazing retentions from the African diaspora, people who come as slaves, and even in churches that I've been to, some of the movements people do when they're dancing are so African dance movements. And I love seeing that. And I'm curious, in music, in the ritual, are there some of those retentions that are purely African American distinctions that have enriched Jewish practice
Yes.
in that context.
Absolutely. And if you visit any of the congregation synagogues, you will find that in our congregation, most of the songs are written by the members from the book of Psalms. The directors put the music to it. Absolutely. And one of the things, writers like to say, oh, that's gospel, there's a Jewish gospel choir. So I like to ask the question, please explain to me when klezmer music grew out of a vacuum of its own being and not influenced by the other cultures in which Jews found themselves in Eastern Europe. I beg to differ. It was definitely influenced by those cultures that it found itself in, just as, you know, the dangerous thing that I first found when I got to Africa was these guys walking around with these big black hats. And I said, what are you doing? They said, we're Orthodox. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we're Orthodox Jews. Stop. Stop. The dress of different movements of Jews has nothing to do with being more authentically Jewish, because you take the dress of the aristocracy from the 18th century of someplace and make that your Sabbath dress. I'm sorry. And that's fine. So you might come in our shul and you may see someone in African garb, but they have on a talit. They're praying the Shema, they're praying the Amidah. We sing Hatikva at our shul. Are other Jewish congregations singing Lift Every Voice and Sing? There should be a flow. So we sing both songs. Because Hatikva is just as important to us as Lift Every Voice and Sing. So this is who we are. So yes, we absorb, but you know, I said, if you've been Jewish all your life, what you know about gospel? Where'd you go to learn about gospel? Were you sneaking to church? So Jews, by and large, just as all people have, and it was said here earlier, from those cultures that they found themselves in, according to the Tanakh, the months, the Jewish months of the calendar that we have now, you don't find the majority of them in the Bible. The name of the month in the Bible are not the name of the month that you find on your Jewish calendar. I wonder why. Because the names on the calendar come ostensibly from Babylonian, not from the Tanakh. So that was borrowed, just as our watches, and somebody left their watch up here loose. Okay? And our concept of time was borrowed by different cultures. None of it grew up in a vacuum. So neither do the Ashkenazi community or the Sephardi community, nor the African and American communities. We are all and have all been influenced. But we should not let where we come from be a point of questioning the depths and the level of our sincerity to Torah and to Judaism, or to other Jews for that.
I'd like to hear you comment on how the line of thought of rabbinical Judaism seduced you as opposed to any other thought.
It made sense. One thing that you have to learn, and that I've also said to the broader Jewish community, I found it so wonderfully interesting. I've sat down on an airplane next to a person who's Jewish, haven't been to synagogue in 40 years, and will say very proudly that they are culturally Jews, but they're secular Jews, but then want to question my Judaism and how much you know.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Or how much you know, God? Wait a minute. You don't even step foot in a synagogue. You don't even own a siddur. And you are asking me? You're giving me a Jewish test? I can't be an African-American secular Jew? It's okay for you, but it's not okay for me. I gotta be holier than thou. I gotta pull out my Arfat Katan Zeke Zeke, you know, so you see what I got one on. And then I wear one. No, you know, so that has to, you know, as Jews from Ashkenazi or other backgrounds, I understand that if you're not doing it, don't ask me or any other person of color, you know, measuring their level of Jewishness or what they're doing, and you're not, you know, like the police should not give you a ticket for a broken headlight if their headlight is out. You can't give a ticket for something that you have are doing. So how are you going to come and examine me and the level of my commitment? And you know, listen, most black Jews that I know haven't. Well, you'll never see them eating anything that's treif. Okay, never, ever. But I know I got some Ashkenazi friends. Okay, so we don't lay those levels out like that. Okay, so we didn't know until recently what it means to be secular, because to us, Judaism was a way of life. Judaism is what you do. You get up in the morning and you pray. I give thanks to the Eternal for opening my eyes and giving strength to my body. You get up in the morning and you wash your hands and you say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. That's what you do. That's what we thought all Jews did. That's what we thought it meant to be Jewish. That's what we thought. So when we met secular Jews, oh, wow. We were wiped out because it seemed like an oxymoron to us. To be Jewish and to not be Jewish. Or to be Jewish and to not do Jewish. But it's no offense. Just to our community, it was like, whoa, this is what we're doing. So, but thank you all very, very much.